Over the last few months, I've been mainly focusing on more advanced sound design techniques, bass production techniques, and all other kinds of techniques. So today I want to kind of circle back to the beginning for those who are new to music production and just talk about what to do when you're a beginner in Psytrance. So as I said, today is mainly going to be talking. I want to run through some of the common points and things that I say to beginners. Maybe talk about some of the problems that beginners run into, or talk about the future plans for actually improving your music production. All those kind of things are going to be tackled in today's video. So I'm not actually going to show you, like from a beginner's perspective, how to start a production, how to get into sound design, how to get into mixing, all of those things. I might do separate videos on those if there's a demand for that. It's not really what my channel is known for, but it could be an interesting series for me to try out. This is just going to be me sitting down full camera like this, discussing and talking a little bit about what it's like to be a beginner and what you should strive for when creating music. So we first need to discuss what Psytrance really is. If you're going to be making it, you need to know what you're going to be making. Psytrance is an electronic dance music genre which focuses on inducing a trance into the listener by repetitive beats. Now this might sound very strange to those who don't know what Psytrance really sounds like, but if you listen to it, you will hear this kind of repetition in the kick and the bass. On top of which you have usually different synth sounds layered and different effect sounds layered, which all have a very psychedelic texture to it. Other words that may come to mind when you're listening to Psytrance are dreamy, atmospheric, ambient, echoey, all those kind of textures are usually applied to Psytrance. So your goal as a producer is going to be trying to create a sound or a bunch of sounds that introduces this kind of almost hypnosis into the listener when they're dancing with the beat, when they're synchronized with the beat and they're actually dancing to it. You might have already noticed that when listening to the genre itself. Maybe you have never heard of Psytrance before and you're just stumbling on this video and you're just curious about what the genre is about. But for those who already listen to Psytrance on a regular basis, they will definitely know that there's this hypnotic kind of effect going on with the genre. Now, as I said, I don't want to dive into exactly what you need to do in your production into a project to achieve this kind of thing. Maybe that's something for a different video. As I said, a few beginner videos would be nice. But what I want to focus on here is how do you start out with something like that? How do you get into it? For those that don't know, there's a lot of different subgenres of Psytrance. You have the very progressive kind of Psytrance, which is fairly much like mainstream and tends to be fairly commercial. It tends to be more danced to in the sense of jumping as opposed to actually being in that trance, and the drops tend to be a lot shorter. And then you have all kinds of more traditional kind of Psytrance styles and different subgenres within Psytrance itself. You can go as low as 110 BPM or 100 BPM for like things like Psybient and the slower kind of Psytrance, until up to like 200 BPM, even faster than that for the really crazy, very high energy kind of high-tech Psytrance as it's called. So there's a very big range of styles and different subgenres to choose from on what you want to produce. And the truth of the matter is you don't have to fit in any of them. If there's something new that you enjoy, or if there's something different that you enjoy, maybe you enjoy some Psybient and you enjoy some high-tech and you want to maybe combine the two into some kind of crazy merger of the two, then you can absolutely do that. When you're starting out, when you're just beginning, you need to experiment a lot with the different things that are around you, the different things that you're hearing. Maybe you're hearing a bunch of cool sounds in a few different songs that you want to combine. Maybe you have a bunch of different ideas that you want to combine. You can just combine them together. The point is this, that you experiment and that you have a bunch of projects, maybe 2 or 3 projects at a time that you're just working on and just playing around with. If you're starting out, if it's just the first few tracks, then don't take things too seriously. You're not trying to improve yet because you still need to identify the problems that you might run into. Because there's going to be a lot of problems. And that's what I'll talk about next. When I say that there's going to be a lot of problems, what I mean is that there's going to be technical things about music production that are really hard to understand when you're first coming in. There's certain things that we do, certain things that need to be done in a track for it to like sound proper and for it to sound good. And these really come in towards the end of a production where all of the ideas have been implemented into the track and you kind of need to fix them up. But more and more towards the advanced level, it is part of the whole process. The way you produce a track really determines how you mix a track, really determines how you master a track, really determines the final product. And again, I know this video is mainly made for very, very beginners, so I'm not going to go into all of the processes. This is again something for a later video perhaps. But there are different stages of creating a song that work in different ways and achieve different objectives for the end result of the track. So you start off with the production, where you import all of the ideas, you create all of the ideas that you have for the track. Then you have the mixing, where you make them sound well together and sound balanced together. And then you have the mastering stage, where you determine the final loudness and the final sound of your track. And then you go into the distribution and actually releasing the track and getting it out there. That's also where the whole thing of marketing comes in, and actually writing a good release and having a nice initial push out of the track that you've created. All of that is part of being a music producer, but again, that is something that you can worry about later. At the beginning stage, you're just in it to make some music, whatever the quality of it is. You just want to experiment with, okay, now I have an idea, now I have something that I have in my mind, some sound or some idea or some arrangement or some particular melody, whatever it is. How do I get it inside of the DAW? How do I go from having ideas in my head to having it on paper in the DAW as an actual song? It is a good idea at this point to listen to a lot of tracks if you have a preferred kind of subgenre that you want to make, if you already have explored the whole area of Psytrance, all of the different subgenres that are out there, and you've drawn some inspiration from here and some inspiration from there, then you can actually start to implement that inspiration into the DAW. There might be a lot of things and a lot of sounds that you don't know how to make. Maybe you need to worry about sound design a lot, or maybe you don't need to worry about it at all. Maybe you already have some experience in different kind of production styles and you can implement that for Psytrance. Maybe you're new to production altogether, and then you need to spend a lot more time actually learning the beginnings of just music production in general. Whatever situation you're in, whatever kind of skill level that you start your Psytrance journey with, there's going to be products and services and other things out there that can really, really help you. As I've mentioned before, tutorials are a very, very big one. That's just an easy way to learn. You have a video on there, you follow what the video is doing, and then you get an end result. Usually those videos show you, okay, this is the synth that we're going to make, this is the topic that we're going to be tackling. Oh, you need to, I don't know, clean up your kick and bass, then there's a video for that. You need to work on a specific synth sequence that you want to make, there's a tutorial for that. There's basically endless resources available now for creating Psytrance with the amount of YouTubers that are out there just making tutorials for you guys every week, right? Then there's the little bit more of advanced like video learning material. So for example, I have my own masterclass, and this is partially a plug for those who are interested in the masterclass, but this is also just to kind of show you that the masterclass is really for kind of like a next level kind of learning experience, in the sense that for one, it's the same kind of video material. It's the same setup for filming. You see my desktop, you see my face cam, and I just talk while I'm recording myself doing what I'm doing in some kind of DAW. The difference is that in a masterclass like that, I have the time, because it's like 24 hours of footage and it's just a recording of everything I do for a track. I have the time to actually show you the whole track writing process. I don't have time for that on YouTube, because a YouTube video is 10 minutes and then it needs to be over. So with a YouTube video, you're constrained to a specific subject, whereas with a masterclass, you just go through the whole masterclass, and in that time that it takes you to go through the whole masterclass, you go through the whole process of actually making a track. And there's going to be small details and things that you might run into that no tutorial is going to explain, but is part of the production process. Now, obviously, it depends on how you want to learn, if you need to buy a masterclass or not. I don't specifically recommend that people just buy a masterclass. I also don't specifically recommend that people just watch tutorials or just read books or just read articles or just use presets or whatever it is that you just want to like buy or use to improve your music production skills. It's not just about getting the product or getting the service or for that matter even something like private lessons, which is a very intense way of learning because you're kind of forced to work with somebody who for one already knows production. So for example, I do private lessons for those that don't know. And it's not that I'm forcing my students to do something, but we have an appointment once a week where we just go through all of the things that we decided to do in that week for like 2 hours, right? We have a 2-hour session. I have my 2-hour session with a particular student, and then we'll go into the track that they've made, what kind of progress they had made that week, what we should focus on next, all of the things that we can do next. Maybe I have an exercise, maybe I have some kind of explainer that I want to do. Whatever it is that I do in those 2 lessons, you're coming in having made something in the last week, some kind of homework, and then you go out with some new thing in mind, already a pointer of what you should worry about next. All of those processes, from the least intense, which I would say are tutorials, to the most intense form of learning, which is this already pre-planned with a teacher kind of learning of private lessons. Everything that you learn in there, you need to repeat on your own. And what I mean by that is that experimentation is very, very important. I've already said it before, when you're starting out, when you're making your first few tracks, and even on a later stage for more advanced producers, experimentation really is key. And there's a lot of value in not just looking at the tutorial and seeing, oh, he is tweaking that knob and it's making this sound go from here to there, but experimenting with it yourself, kind of building the patch from the tutorial and then maybe modifying it a little bit more, experimenting with it a little bit more. What if this knob that he put at this position in the tutorial, I put it at that position instead? What will it do to the sound? That is how you actually learn stuff. That's how you start making the connection between all of the things that you see on screen, all of those massive plugin windows that don't really tell you what they're doing, and the actual sounds that are coming out of it. So I want to do a little bit of a chat on like copying and using presets. There's a lot of debate on should you use presets, should you use samples, should you make every sound on your own, should you be inspired by other tracks, should you just be able to take an idea from a track and use it in your own track, should you remix a lot of material, should you make a lot of original tracks. All of that is basically under one big umbrella of how much original stuff should you use in your tracks. And for me, when you're starting out, I definitely recommend going towards the more, I wouldn't say stealing, but being inspired by it. The difference between stealing and inspiration is that inspiration can be, oh, I like this sound from this track. I like this little structural thing that they do from this track. I like the way that they have this one effect on this one vocal in this track. There's certain overarching ideas to most of the productions, and I would say that inspiration really sits in the details, whereas stealing from a track is just taking the idea from a track and implementing it in your own track, right? This track is doing this whole pattern because then the bass line creates this nice groove. I'm going to steal that whole groove and I'm going to steal the whole idea of the track, the core principle of that track. Really, you can think about it, the things that make that track unique. When you're starting out, the kind of inspiration that you're looking for is the small little details in the music from the producers that you're listening to, implementing those into your unique sounding productions. Part of the reason why I say this is because I don't like, just taking somebody else's idea and using it as your own. I think that that's wrong to do. But also because it's a wrong way to learn. You're not actually trying to learn how to make his music. You're trying to learn how to make your own music. And you should be able to just come up with your own ideas. Also, if you take a professional track and you take its whole idea and you start implementing that in your own track, I can almost guarantee you that your result is going to sound a little bit lower quality. Because obviously you're beginning out, you don't really know how to balance things, you don't really know how to mix things maybe. Maybe you're just not dealing with the highest quality sounds or samples or presets or whatever. What that can mean is that you're basically just creating a lower quality version of the track that you're inspired by. And that's normal when you're starting out. Obviously, when you're going to start out, the first few tracks aren't going to be hits. Everybody, when they're starting out learning a new skill, they have to start from the bottom, and so have you. But it can be very discouraging to listen to a project that you know can sound really good because you've heard the idea being done by a professional, and then you hear it in your own track and it's sounding a little bit off and you don't really know why, and you have no real way of actually fixing it, but this is the only track that you're working on, so you keep pushing yourself. That can be very, very discouraging if at a very early stage you come to the point where you need to push yourself to work on music. That's really, really hard to do. So that's why I highly recommend for beginners to mainly stay with their own ideas and try to develop their own ideas. It's also a skill just to come up with better ideas, and that's something that you need to train as well, obviously. Now, when it comes to improvement over time, what you want to do is you want to write down a plan. What do I actually want to improve? And that's really hard. It can be really hard to identify problems with the productions that you're currently making and how to get them to the next level. In this case, what can help a lot is asking feedback from other producers if you're associated with kind of a production community, like for example the Discord that I'm running. Then you can ask a few questions, ask around if maybe your track is sounding good or not, ask for feedback on your track, but also just in general ask questions about how do you do your kick and bass? How do you do your sound design? How do you do your mixing? What is the specific process that you go through to do this effect or this sound or something like that? You're obviously at the beginner stage and there's a lot for you to learn, so you need a place where you can, if there's no tutorial for the specific subject that you want to learn out there, or there's no other learning material for it out there, then you need a place where you can just ask a question about music production. And once you have some of the questions down, once you get a bunch of the answers on, okay, what I actually need to do to improve this song, you need to take it from just like one production or a few productions, and you need to basically extend that into a plan. How am I going to improve my mixing? How am I going to improve my sound design? How am I going to improve the samples that I use? How am I going to improve the masterings that I put out? There's a bunch of different ways that you can think of. The easiest one, but the most costly one, is to, for example, hire somebody else. Maybe you want to hire a mixing engineer. Maybe you want to buy a couple of presets that you want to use. In that case, you're basically buying somebody else's sound design like process. But you can also do that for something like mixing or mastering. If you struggle with those things, then obviously somebody else will be able to do that for you. And I see this as kind of like an easy way out if you just have this one really good idea that you really want to like hear in its fullest potential. Maybe you have a really good production, but you don't know how to do mixing and mastering. Then you can hire a mixing engineer and a mastering engineer to actually get that last stage done. The other way is obviously to learn them yourselves, and that's the most common way to do it. You can just throw money at the problem to make it go away. Obviously, if you have multiple tracks that you want to mix and master, then it's not a good idea to hire a mixing engineer and a mastering engineer for all of them. That's just going to be way more costly than it's going to like deliver. So you're going to need to learn how to do mixing and mastering yourself. And that's kind of true with all of the other things as well, right? It's the same with sound design, it's the same with structuring and arranging and all of that stuff. The difference is, and one of the key problems with production is that, especially for mastering, that comes at the end of the production stage. And a lot of projects don't reach that end of the production stage. Usually you'll start out with an idea, you're all excited about it, you have a lot of inspiration for it, and then you start to write it a bit, you start to think about it a little bit more, and once you have spent, I don't know, maybe 20 hours on the production phase of it, you're really starting to get a little bit annoyed by all of the sounds that are in there. You're feeling like, hey, this track is a little bit of a low quality. I would have done these things differently, but I've spent so much time on it. I actually need to finish this track. I need to put this track out there. And then you're kind of disregarding it for the later stages, or you just lose interest in the project altogether and you just stop working on that project and you move on to the next one, never even having mastered or mixed it. So for that reason, I do feel the need to give you the advice of trying to finish your projects. I know it can be really hard in some cases to be forced to finish something that doesn't really sound like the way you like it. But one of the things that I've learned, especially since I've been doing mixing in its own session, is that there's a lot of surprises that can happen if you actually take the time into mixing and mastering your track. A lot of tracks that I found that I was like, well, this production is kind of over for me. I don't really like how it sounds. It's getting to the point where it's annoying to work on this production. Once I go into the mixing stage and into the mastering stage, it's like a whole new light for me because I get to reevaluate all of the choices that I've made in terms of the balance between all of the elements. How do the individual sounds that sit in my track combine into the track as a whole? Because obviously, when you have a track, there's the individual elements that create the song, and you need to mix them together, which is the whole mixing process, in order for them to fit well together into the whole of the track, the whole of the song. Another easy way to improve and actually learn these kind of things is to release your tracks, which is a very key step in the production process, because it is the step where you get input from your audience. Now, as every producer knows, you are going to start off with a small audience. There's going to be maybe 1 or 2 people that are going to be fan of your music, that kind of stumble upon your music if you're just putting it out there. You maybe have a bunch of friends that listen to the same music as you do that want to listen to it. Maybe you have a few people in your inner circle that don't listen to Psytrance, but that still will listen to your tracks because you made it. that is going to be your initial audience, and that's what you're going to focus on most of the time. Because whether we like it or not, we like to make things for other people, not just for ourselves. Maybe from like up until a certain point, we like to just make things for ourselves. We like the hobby of creating things, but it's always better and it's always nicer if you can share that passion with somebody else that is also passionate about your music. The other thing is that they can create valuable insight into what your music is supposed to sound like. Do they actually like the sound of your track? Or do they say, well, if you change this, then the track would be a lot better. If you had done it this way, then the track would be a lot nicer. Those kind of comments may seem like kind of like hate comments or comments that you should ignore, but those are valid learning opportunities. This is actually the reason why a lot of producers go with demo releases or preview releases, where they show off part of the track or demo version of the track so that they can have the audience already listen to it and then make changes on the spot if there's a particular kind of feedback that gets thrown out a lot. If you put out your music and 4 people listen to it and 3 of them say, oh, I don't like this individual sound that is sitting in the track, then you might want to reconsider having that sound in the track. Now, with the same kind of psychology as we talked about before, in that when you have 20 hours in a project, it's really hard to make big sweeping changes and to actually say, well, I need to do things completely differently. I don't want to give up what I've already created. You might find yourself in this case saying, well, it's really hard for me to make those changes. So what I would recommend is always taking the feedback and the signals that you get from your audience and implementing those not in the production that you're currently working on, but in the next production. As I said, sometimes it can be really hard to reconsider the choices that you've made in a track that you've already worked on for 20, 30, 40, whatever many hours it is. Oh yeah, and be prepared, it does take that amount of time to actually make a full track. The final thing that I will say on this topic is, now I'm making it sound that you're making music for the crowd so that you should 100% listen to the crowd. That's not always the case. If you get feedback that you don't enjoy, maybe they say, well, you need to add, I don't know, a horn sound to this track. Maybe you don't want a horn sound in the track, then don't add a horn sound to that track, right? There's feedback that you're not going to enjoy, that you're not going to like to implement. And therefore, you don't always have to listen to the people. At the end of the day, you are making music because you like it. So the final thing that I'll talk about is how do you get into more of being an advanced producer? How do you get to that stage? And there's really 2 different things that I see that you need to start doing to get to a more advanced level really, really quickly. One is experimentation, and I've already talked before that experimentation is really, really keen. But what I see a lot of advanced producers do, and this is by no means just the separation, right, of, oh, do this and you become an advanced producer. But I think most advanced producers at some point just start to tend to do this. It's working in separate sessions. It's when you're experimenting, you're not writing. A lot of people, what they'll do is they'll start a production and they'll say, oh, in this production, I want to experiment with this, and this. Right? They'll found a new sound design technique or new kick and bass creation technique or some new technique for mixing or some crazy chain for master chain. Whatever it is that they found, they want to implement something new into their production. And it's generally a good idea to be innovative in the way that you produce, right? To make the track that you're currently working on better than the last track. But the real way that you kind of do that is not to work and experiment in the track itself. What you tend to see with other producers is that they spend a lot of time outside of actual production sessions and inside a lot of experimentation sessions where there's just experimentation going on without the worry of having to write a track, without the pressure of I need to come up with something creative and this needs to at some point go onto the dance floor and make people dance. There's just the pure experimentation that they want to do for that day. And thus they are just like training the skills that they have. And then once they actually feel creative and inspired, they'll go into their production and start to implement the techniques and the things that they've learned and discovered. The second thing that I see a lot of advanced producers do is collaborations. And I've started collaborating a little bit more in the last couple of months, but also I see it a lot within like the professional industry, there's a lot of exchange between ideas going on just because you're collaborating with somebody else who has a whole different workflow, a whole different way of doing things. And then you collaborate with this other guy and you share information, you pass on different information and you pass on different ideas and techniques that you both use. It's kind of another layer of interaction with, you know, the community. The same way that I talked about tutorials, you can have another layer of tutorials by investing in a masterclass. You can have another layer of feedback by joining a Discord community or some kind of production community. You can even argue that you can have another layer of sound design competence or sound creation competence by investing in samples and presets. So collaboration with other artists is very much one other way to almost subconsciously start improving your workflow more and more and more. So that's everything that I wanted to say, everything that I wanted to mention. This video has gone on for way too long for me recording wise. I hope that I'll be able to edit the runtime down by a lot. But one of the things that I want to ask you is if you want to see me focus a little bit more on beginners, by sometimes actually showing the DAW and showing what I'm doing, then let me know in the comments specifically what you want to see me do. Other than that, if you're new here and you want to see more of the stuff that I do in terms of tutorials and other videos that I make, then make sure that you're subscribed. You can also turn on bell notifications if you want to be notified by YouTube whenever I upload something. But that's going to be the video for today. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.